All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome again to MTS's COVID-19 webinar series. We're just waiting for our attendees to log on. We've got some great level of participation so far. I'd like to introduce myself. I am Kat Shaw, the Director of Marketing and Content for Mountain Travel Symposium, and I will be your host today for our webinar. Before we get started, I'd like to go through a couple of housekeeping notes for you and talk through all of the features and functions that will be available during this webinar. First up, we have the Q&A. Feel free to submit questions to our Q&A throughout the webinar. We will be saving these questions to the end of the webinar, but at any point when your questions come up related to the content, feel free to submit them when those questions arise. We also have a chat feature on the webinar. That feature is available for you to be able to chat with the other attendees. Please try not to submit questions during the chat because it will not be monitored for questions. Submit your questions through the Q&A. We also have a number of polls that will happen throughout the webinar, so keep an eye out for those. They'll pop up on your webinar screen, and make sure that you submit your responses. And then lastly, we also have a survey that will pop up in your browser at the end of the webinar. Please make sure you complete that survey. We would love your feedback and your response to how you thought the webinar was and the content. It'll greatly help us in planning future webinars and assessing the market's needs. So with that, I am going to introduce our presenters. Today's webinar is called Mountain Travel Crisis and Recovery, How to Reemerge and Build Trust in a COVID-Conscious World. We have Lindsay DeWitt, who is the Executive Vice President of Sustainability and Purpose and the President of Public Relations for Barkley, as well as Warren Wilkinson, the VP of Growth for Barkley, presenting to us today. So with that, Lindsay is going to take it away and start the presentation.
Great. Thank you, Kat. Hopefully everyone's seeing my screen okay now. We're so excited to be with you, and we thank you for having us. We look forward to a time when we can actually interact in person. I was telling Kat and the team at Mountain Travel that I was so excited to visit Tahoe in the spring because it's one of the first places I skied and a favorite summer spot, but I'm equally thrilled about Vail this next year because it's where I got married. So lots of mountain time in my past and hopefully lots in my future. So we're excited to talk to you today about, we're going to bring you a sliver of the content that we actually planned to share with you back in March, but mostly we're going to share some points of view as it relates to the recovery phase of the COVID-19 pandemic. You know, the fortunate great outdoors advantage that you have is something that we'll also be discussing. We believe that brands that deliver on a consumer desire while balancing the need for health and safety precautions are going to reemerge successfully from this time and ultimately build trust with their audiences inside and outside their organizations. So today's agenda, we're going to touch on 5 different topics. It seems like a lot, but we're going to move quickly and take some notes, and as Kat referenced, be sure and submit some of your questions. So today we'll quickly share some components of managing the evolving crisis in a way that doesn't just protect your brand, but also really strengthens your reputation. We're going to provide some perspective on what we call the useful brand and how brands that are useful act in today's circumstances. We're going to show you a different way of looking at the consumer journey because there are some new needs that have emerged during this pandemic. And we're going to talk about some opportunities and provide you with some thoughts and ideas, some thought starters to really help you hit the ground running as you innovate and reinvent and emerge from this crisis even stronger. So let's get started on reputation. I fortunately had an opportunity to squeeze in a visit to the mountains before our season ended abruptly. And this is my son Palmer on day one of our visit. He started his ski career at 5. And this is my son Graham on day one of what was supposed to be his first snow ski experience. But within about 6 hours of our arrival, we had an influenza A diagnosis on our hands in a house of 15 people. And to say that I went into crisis mode was an understatement. I was concerned for my son, but I also was really looking forward to hitting the slopes. So we executed our own little mini quarantine. And little did I know at the time, but we were all in for something much greater that we've all been experiencing the last several weeks. You know, the same crisis management techniques that we use with clients actually worked in my mini crisis. We adjusted a plan, we assembled a team, and we really leveraged the tools at our disposal. And, you know, they are likely the steps that you all leveraged in the initial days of the current pandemic, when things came to a screeching halt, and you know, those days following where all we were seeing were headlines, you know, like this about the travel industry and, you know, how travel will change after COVID-19, and you know, what Americans did what. So you know, it would be fabulous if locking into crisis mode and the steps in our plans were as easy as that familiar lock of our boots into our skis. But, you know, if it wasn't for your organization, when things came to a halt, you take note and take some time for reflection when this slows. Because from our perspective, real crisis management doesn't begin when the crisis does. It really is about, you know, putting into place the processes and the procedures to manage a crisis before, during, and after it occurs. So we're going to talk through 5 key components of that management. The first is your plan, both a business continuity plan and a crisis communications plan. You know, they really should be issue specific, and forevermore, they will include human health topics. But the best in class plans really have considered all of the potential scenarios, and they have the appropriate steps and the right messaging to match those scenarios, so that you aren't you aren't flat-footed when something happens. They also require a yearly revisit to evaluate what did occur and your team's performance, and also to think about and discuss new situations that you haven't yet planned for, but should be a part of that plan. The next is team. And you need a great team, and they need to know that they're on the team. I am sometimes surprised in crisis situations where people are brought into the fold and are pulled into these work groups and given a role, but they weren't prepared for it, or they didn't know that they might be a part of that team. So roles and responsibilities really need to be clear. It's ideal if your team has been briefed at least yearly, and it's even better if you've actually completed some type of practice drill at some point. I know that this isn't the first crisis that you've ever faced, that you likely had, and I was watching the industry, and there were several across the industry even before the pandemic hit. So some of you were kind of getting, dipping your toe in the water for the crisis that occur during the season. The next is leadership. And that doesn't necessarily mean one leader. You know, it may be 2, it may be 3, it's whatever is right for your organization. But there's this great piece from the National Preparedness Leadership Institute at Harvard that I love. And it posed this fabulous question that said, are you leading through a crisis or only managing a response? And I think that's an important delineation. You have to be leading through the crisis. and looking forward to what's going to happen after. But you also have to be managing a response. And sometimes those are, two different people on your leadership team. You have to have someone that's in charge of coordinating all of the players. And finally, you have to have a face and a voice of the organization that's communicating throughout the crisis with your key stakeholders. Next is tools. And tools, you need useful assets that are at the ready to help your team be timely and be incredibly efficient. These may be things from decision trees to a communications matrix to quick turn digital and video capabilities. These types of tools should not be things that you're scrambling to create when you're in the midst of a crisis. And finally, experts. This is not the time to go it alone. Outside counsel and collaborators that can advise and support you and your organization are incredibly valuable. And they come in a lot of different forms. So, you may think of an agency partner or someone that you work with on the marketing side that you may go to, but also think about your industry associations and your fellow business leaders and your civic leaders in your community. They all provide fabulous outside perspective, and that really cannot be undervalued during a crisis. So these are 5 components that we feel are really important. They're imperatives for any organization today trying to work through a crisis, because if it's not, we often say it's not if a crisis will occur, it's when. And hopefully you had at least some of these tools, at the ready as we entered into this pandemic. If you didn't, definitely take note. It's never too late to kind of course correct, to improve in a couple of different areas. But we'd love to, at this point, pause for our first poll question on just managing an evolving crisis, and how you and your organization felt you were best equipped. So we've got all 5 of those components of fabulous crisis management, and we'd love to hear which area you felt you were best equipped in, and in which area you felt least equipped. I think Kat will be sharing the results of our poll here quickly.
We've got about 60% of our audience have filled out the poll, so just gathering last few responses here.
Great. Okay. So it looks like team is definitely leading in terms of which area of crisis management you felt you were best equipped. That's awesome. When you have a great team in these situations, you can really solve for so much. But in terms of least equipped, I don't know if I can see the whole thing, but it looks like plan may be leading there in terms of planning scenarios and ensuring that you've thought through various scenarios and you have kind of specific messaging and specific steps attached to some of those scenarios. Okay, great. Well, there's always an opportunity after you get through and you have a little moment to breathe, to kind of think moving forward how you can create some of those more comprehensive plans so that your team, which is really sounds like are really strong, really can hit the ground running and move quickly. And we're going to discuss today that a global pandemic of this magnitude definitely requires some custom strategy. And that's where we'll spend the majority of our time today. We're going to start by discussing our perspective on brands. This is a time for brands to truly act fast in the coming months, and a time for brands to be as useful as possible in combining their purpose, why they exist, and practicality for their consumers. So there's this great quote that we've been using in our organization by Dr. Michael Ryan of the World Health Organization. You may have seen a clip of him the last month or so. But he says, if you need to be right before you move, you will never win. Perfection is the enemy of the good, and speed trumps perfection. And that, it was kind of his mantra when he's thinking about how he handles pandemics around the world. And it's not too dissimilar from how we need to move as brands in this particular environment. So, it is a challenging time and things are changing by the hour, but our belief is that no one is going to blame you if you act now and overreact, but there will be little forgiveness for inaction and underreacting. This is how we see a brand. To us, it's much more than a name and a mark. Everything the brand does is one more reason to choose a brand or not, to love a brand or not. And, we call this the whole brand spectrum because it really allows you to maximize the usefulness of your brand at a time when people need you most. You have a product and a service that people value. Lean into that into a new way. Make your product and service its most empathetic, useful self. The whole brand spectrum is an important foundational element because we're going to share some ideas today that really span this entire spectrum. From your internal culture and workforce to the messaging that you deliver through your marketing. You really need to take action across the whole brand spectrum. That's what modern consumers expect. They're as interested in how you treat your employees as they are with what your last Instagram post was. So just consider that they are looking at you through this entire lens, not just what you're delivering in your communications. And today, that consumer is on a whole new journey. Your consumer has different needs than they did before March 5th. So this is the journey that you never knew you needed. But in times of crisis, simple frameworks like this can help you make decisions. And we've used some best practices from Nielsen to build this, but it can be customized for your brand where you can really start to fill in strategy and tactic based on the various phases. In the adjust phase, which we're already through, we don't want to go back there, but we were all hunkering down and trying to work through logistics. Today, we're in the peak, but we're nearing recovery. And in peak, where it's kind of a limbo land where our consumers and our employees are really trying to juggle a lot without any definitive light at the end of the tunnel. So what does your brand, do? How do they help them both physically and mentally? And then as we ease into the recovery phase, and that's probably going to be a long tail recovery phase, how do you provide clarity during this unsure time? And when we get back to some sense of normal, it's going to be a new normal. How do you collectively create a sigh of relief for your consumers? How do you help them kind of breathe in some fresh air and breathe that sigh of relief? I think, this data and information that I'm sharing with you now just really helps illustrate some of the different needs. And this is a really interesting look at how consumers were feeling just this past week. In fact, anxiety and stress and worry, as you see on the left end of that graph, they're still very high, but they're declining. And interestingly enough, boredom right there in the middle is on the incline, it's on the rise. So the implication is that brands that take action that is going to continue to help alleviate these concerns and alleviate this anxiety and stress, but also help our consumers cope with the boredom that they're feeling, they're going to be valued by those consumers because this is an interesting kind of dichotomy here. In this peak phase, that we find ourselves in, we're starting to identify at our agency some of the various need states that our consumers have. And this is derived from some Barclay social listening that we completed. You may want to conduct some of your own research, but you'll see that there are some needs that our consumers have right now. And it's great to locate and identify a couple of these specific needs of your audience and think about how do you address some of these needs and the actions that you may take as a brand. You know, what can you provide that's going to help them cope with the lockdown? How can you assist them in educating their children at home or keeping their family and their kids physically active? What could be your role in that as a mountain travel destination or as a resort? One really great example, I think that I love, a client of ours, Planet Fitness, actually created a program called United We Move, where, you know, during the pandemic, as their gyms are all closed, they're hosting these Facebook live stream work-ins. And it's really designed to reduce some stress and help people get in a workout at home. It's super simple and practical. And it's a direct lift from their purpose of creating a healthier world through pressure-free fitness. So that's just kind of one example of how you can identify a need state, look at your purpose, and really think about how you can be practical and useful during this time. In the early days of the crisis, we saw many examples of brands like Planet Fitness embracing some important tenets. And I'm going to share with you a few of those three of those. And they're important to remember that even as we go into recovery phase, these are still key. And the first one is think local. You know, find your ground game in the communities that you serve. And we love kind of looking at this intersection between the business that you're in and your purpose and your communities. We want you to think about engaging the people in your communities to the fullest extent possible. Really lean on each other and unite like you never have before. You're in a community that has a lot of connection. Think about how do you just maximize that to the fullest. And then number two is leverage your assets. Identify what you have a surplus of and use it to activate when you're having, you know, business constraints. What is it? You know, it may not be physical assets. It may be virtual. It may be your communications channels. It may actually be your people. It may be your community. It may be your guests and their incredible love and dedication to your brand. How can you, you know, use these assets that you have as an organization during this time? And finally, number three is put your people first. Your brand's first responsibility is to its own people. Any action that you do for a consumer is going to be trumped by inaction on the part of your workforce. So consider, how has your brand put the care of its people first? How are you supporting and providing for the safety of those that are still working? And more importantly, and next is, how is your brand supporting those who are no longer working? And have you made concessions about, you know, beyond what is required? How are you going to keep in touch with them? Because at some point, you're going to bring them back into the fold. So think about how do you really maximize your connection to people. As a March 19 article in The Atlantic shared, Americans' response to COVID-19 should stand as one of the most beautiful moments in our country's history, a moment of shared, galvanized national spirit. It's interesting because social distancing measures where people are actually being forced inward may have rekindled a communal spirit, causing people to really turn outward. I just think about my own block in my own city and how communal our block has become. If there was ever a place in America that I can imagine the same feeling being felt, it is definitely in the mountain towns that many of you call home and that many of us also love. And we're obviously thinking about all of the communities that we love. So as we mentioned earlier, that boredom is setting in addition to this kind of unfair advantage of boredom that consumers might be feeling, there are some others, if you look hard enough, that we believe provide some great advantage to mountain destinations. And my colleague and VP of Travel, Warren Wilkinson, is actually going to take you through a few of these key opportunities for mountain travel. And we think it's, you know, a great, you've got some great advantages. And first, I'm going to start with this one kind of fun one that we think is proof that we're all missing the mountains. Isn't that great? I mean, that is, I think the best I could do in my backyard was a box fort. So I really appreciate that. But the mountains are calling. People out there are missing you. I think that's great news, but there are also some other key opportunities. Warren?
Thanks, Lindsay. It's really good to be with everybody today. I was lucky enough to call Steamboat Springs home for 9 years, so I have a deep affection for many of the mountain communities that I got to visit over those 9 years. But I think there's a lot of opportunity for the mountain resort industry as we start to get to the recovery phase and look at what travel is going to look like moving forward. You know, well-being was a primary driver of spending for American consumers before this outbreak, and it's going to continue to shape behavior going forward. Following COVID-19, and as shelter-in-place orders are lifted, hygiene will continue to supersede other wellness concerns for many Americans. After the virus is contained, health will remain a top priority. People will have everyday reminders of the potential threat as businesses are expected to employ social distancing efforts and elevated hygiene practices. You know, only today, Hilton announced a partnership with the Mayo Clinic and Lysol to develop a cleaning program. So it's going to be at the forefront. But the mountain resort industry could benefit in a number of these related economies. So, you know, the global wellness economy is $4.5 trillion market. And I think the mountain resort community fits into each one of these in a really nice way. The obvious one is the natural social distance could be a real primary consideration because you have so much space and so many outdoor activities. But it's also the healthy lifestyle brand image that all of your mountain resorts present to would-be travelers. Can you move the slide there, Nancy? Thanks. So it's pretty clear, and I think everybody, this is not going to be a shock to anybody here, that people are desiring to avoid crowded places, and it has increased over time. People are seeking solutions that allow them to avoid crowded places. And I think mountain resort communities in their generally remote locations can provide a welcome respite for people who have been stuck inside from shelter-in-place mandates. The natural, larger physical footprints of mountain resorts lend themselves to social distancing, and all the outdoor activities provide opportunities for fresh air, outdoor activity, exercise that they haven't been able to do while they've been mandated in shelter-in-place orders, as well as feeling reborn, getting back into the mountains. The healthy lifestyle image resorts offer, coupled with the numerous outside activities, are going to make you an attractive initial place to travel for the restless traveler. So, you know, it's interesting if you look at this chart. The short-term rental business was starting to outperform other markets, and then the bottom fell out. The impact the pandemic has had on the short-term rental sector has been significant. Airbnb's decision in mid-March to offer a full refund to any guests who canceled their reservation overrode any policies local hosts may have had in place. The company's decision was clearly the right one, but created some backlash from hosts who saw the future revenue disappear. From there, the sector has begun a slight pivot as multi-month stays are now being more widely accepted and promoted. As an FYI, stays of 30 days or more were already 15% of Airbnb's business before the pandemic. So this is just going to grow as time goes by. I think what we're going to see is business travelers who have been tethered to their domiciles and working from home will want to travel even more than they have in the past, and they're going to be looking for small cities and communities as their preferred leisure options. "82% of travelers planning to travel in the next 6 months will change their travel plans." This is a statistic that I'm sure all of you have heard or have seen similar surveys done. But the good news is that Americans long for travel. It's part of what makes life worth living. Americans longing to travel will look to more domestic destinations initially. Off the beaten path attractions and outdoor spaces will see more visitors. Regional travel, and in particular car-based excursion, will likely be the first types of travel to rebound, buoyed by extremely low gas prices, some of the lowest prices we've had in decades. While we were confined by shelter-in-place mandates, destinations can build anticipation and desire for visitation once the health crisis passes by offering virtual tours, education around the unique characteristics and offerings of the destinations. And a lot of this has already occurred. You guys are already doing this. You're putting up webcams, you're doing virtual activities so people can experience the mountains while not being there. But it's just getting them to dream and get excited. And I think when shelter in place is lifted, one of the first places people are going to want to go are the mountain resort communities, to be outside and active. So here's an interesting, venues with space have an advantage in our COVID-19 environment and continued threat. I think in the post-COVID-19 world, people will still want to meet and convene. And a lot of mountain resort communities have meeting facilities. However, the meetings business could look a little different. Large venues would lose business initially, but for how long, no one really knows. Coinciding with a decrease in large events, meeting planners expect to use large venues less often. Mountain resorts may offer attractive options to meet the new demands in the post-COVID-19 environment. Interestingly enough, in a recent North Star Meetings Group pulse survey of meeting planners recognizing the need to pivot, fully 82% of meeting planners surveyed expect an increased need for virtual event platforms along with virtual site visits. So things that you may want to start thinking about. Education specific to health, safety, and professional services for ensuring the health and safety of meeting participants are also very important. There are going to be some new demands from the people who want to meet and for the meeting planners that plan them. From hand sanitizers to room design, an overwhelming majority of planners are considering the following for their future events: providing hand sanitizers, implementing social responsibility, best practices and protocols, displaying signage addressing prevention and controls, new meeting room designs to allow distance between attendees, and measures for reducing and managing crowd densities. And I think what the mountain resort community is going to have is really speaks to that, the ability to provide space and a sense of there's outdoor space as well as a smaller meeting venue.
Great. Thank you, Warren. I think now we're interested with such great data and information that we think pulls out some key opportunities for mountain travel. We've got another poll question here. We're just curious to hear from all of you and see if you and understand if you've completed any qualitative or quantitative research on your own consumer specific needs during this time. So a quick poll to just see how many of you have completed some research. You may be considering it, but it is always really important to understand as we're looking at some of this secondary information that there may be some opportunity to hear from your consumers directly. And we're going to talk about some ideas of how we partner with them moving forward as we come out of this and craft our plans, our move forward plans. Okay, so there has been some research. About almost 40% of you are reporting that you have done a little bit of research. It looks like there's a lot of opportunity for some additional research, and that can be really as simple as some social listening and using some interesting social listening tools to get that, to more of a quantitative research of your consumer, your customer and guest, and finding out what their challenges are and what they're thinking about to really help you prepare. So great. Well, as we move into this next section, we're going to talk a little bit about how we think strong brands should behave. And we're going to share with you some thought starters across a couple of different categories. So, we believe strong brands definitely don't go dark. They focus on useful innovation that will allow them to emerge even stronger than they were before the crisis. During this time, traditional marketing and communications might not be your primary weapon. So think about that. As we shared earlier, we are considering the whole brand spectrum, from business strategy to marketing actions, when we ideate for the brands that we work with. And we think that's an important, really important approach. So these prompts focus on useful innovation to take now in order to emerge stronger as a brand in recovery. It's important to kind of go on the offense, and that will pay off in the long run. And when we're ideating currently, we're kind of thinking about some of these different categories along that brand spectrum. So we're going to start with consumers. And the important thing about the consumer audience here is, as you're putting together your plans, is to make them feel useful. There is no better time to have them build the future with you than now. You have a unique opportunity, and we talked a little bit about the importance of understanding their mindset, a unique opportunity to have a little bit more candid and frank conversation and relationship with your current consumer. We're all humans. And sometimes brands forget to treat their consumers just like people, just like humans. We're all in it. So don't ask, what can my brand do for my consumer? It's better to actually ask, what can my brand help my consumer do? I think reframing that question helps us break down barriers between consumer and brand. It also helps reduce consumer skepticism. So here's a few idea starters. We've all been craving some fresh air after being cooped up in our homes for however many months, but navigating the new rules for how to enjoy that fresh air is a little daunting. And so this is an idea about using technology to share information. Use your AirDrop function on phones as a contact-free way to give tips and tricks to people on the mountain. And when users accept the AirDrop from the resort, they'll open up a photo, and it's a quick guide about ways to enjoy that fresh air safely in this new normal. We can also encourage those users to AirDrop it with other users within their 30-foot AirDrop zone. And this helps just kind of spread information, important information, spread intel instead of germs in this case. And anyone who shares could get a code to claim a reward at the gear shop or a restaurant at the base. But it's just a fun way to interact with your consumer and make them feel a part of the education of their fellow travelers and guests. This next idea, we've all heard about the face mask shortage and the home remedies that everyone has turned to. But the face masks, like neck gaiters and baklavas, are already an essential on any ski hill. Today, they just so happen to also help the spread of the virus. So engage your consumers perhaps in designing your own official version, a version that you could even give away as part of your health and safety message. But an open call for design submissions lets consumers take on an activity and contribute to you in a way that they may love. The winning design could be printed and could be the official face mask of the season. It's also a little bit commemorative, in a way, because it becomes a kind of a connector, something that we have to signify this world event that we've all been a part of, and it has brought us together. So just a few ideas to kind of get your wheels turning on consumer. The next is employee. And this is all about, I mentioned earlier in our talk that consumer action will be trumped by inaction on the part of the brand for its workforce. This is really the time to prove that your brand is employee first and that you really believe in your brand culture. Employees are turning to employers for direction more than they're turning to news and government. They want your support. Be there for them. How has your brand put the care of its own people first? And ask yourself, how have you rallied your people with a shared ambition that really gets everyone excited to play their part? We don't think now is the time to limit innovation. It's really a time to supercharge it, because there's opportunity here to come out of this even stronger. We can spread that responsibility instead of limiting it to a few on your team. Your employees really want to feel useful during this time, and it's a great way to give them that opportunity to provide even more value. And so we're going to share a couple of ideas there on employees specifically. This first one is, how can that team that manages your technology really push the limits of what's next? Is it possible that, there's new uses of some of our on-mountain tech that supports the new reality of social distancing, where we may have historically received snow and grooming reports and open runs and lift wait times? How can it now include people and proximity readings, or allow guests to distance on walking and hiking and biking trails in the summer months, and then also on the ski runs in the winter? Can that be, that tool that really allows them to live in the way that they know they need to live moving forward, or at least until, we feel comfortable that we have a vaccine and that we can move about even more freely. Furthermore, what does this new focus on public health mean for your medical team? This is an opportunity to establish clear leadership over human health and safety measures at your resort, and really set a new bar for training your staff and also for guest communication. And this creates a lot of trust with your guests. A chief health and safety officer kind of elevates that role that health is going to play in your operations. Maybe you have someone who fits the bill already and can play a little bit more public-facing role moving forward. And then finally, this next employee idea is all about your culture. How can you bring some of those valued employees into the fold? They are the face of your brand culture. We call this, lifty love. Those employees, other mountain employees that work on the mountain, they really, and they love the mountain. They exude enthusiasm to your guests. Is there a way to engage them in the planning and think through ideas, and also reward them by giving them some free rein when you do reopen, and really letting them have a first experience? Now is the time to test, to learn, and acquire new believers. And that is this new consumer section. We're going to share a couple of ideas here. Rather than thinking about this as a time to save every last consumer, think about this as a time of innovation and bringing in new consumers. Brands can emerge from this phase in a stronger position, and those that do will create kind of experiences and kind of disrupt their category. Warren shared with you some fabulous information about what people are looking to do and how they're going to travel differently this year. What does that mean for mountain travel? In the case of restaurants, they're becoming grocery stores. In the case of distilleries, they're creating new products that are using some of their raw materials. What does that mean for mountain travel resorts? How are you going to reach a new consumer? And so with some of that insight that Warren shared in mind, here's a great idea on lapsed consumers. I'll let Warren share this.
So this is an opportunity to collaborate and partner with the entire resort community. A resort is so much more than just the mountain company. It's all the retail and lodging and attractions that are found in that community and the people that support them. So here's a chance to excite and reward returning guests to the community. Folks that ended up having to cancel their reservation because of COVID-19, or folks that had already come and you're inviting back. So this is future and past guests, bringing them back to celebrate the reopening of the resort. It's more than coupons. It's a chance to reward people for their loyal visitation. Initial visitors will trailblaze for future visitors as they gain confidence in venturing beyond their hometowns. And people talk, and when they feel welcomed and exciting about getting back into the mountains, the buzz will be created.
And then next is partners. You know, we feel like now is the time to really band together with like-minded partners. And it's hard to shoulder the challenges of COVID as one brand. But a way to build that, one way to build that powerful bridge to recovery is to actually build partnerships. They can be one of your biggest creative tools right now. You can talk about who you are as a brand all day long, but having mutually beneficial partnerships can really help you across your business. And so we wanted to touch on partners.
So, as I mentioned earlier, mountain resorts are so much more than just the mountain and its offerings, but getting the entire community together to launch the reopening of the resort this summer, and again at the beginning of the winter, getting everybody excited about giving the best possible experience to your new visitors. And this is a chance to people to rally together, get excited about the reopening, and getting the entire community working together to provide the best possible experience and elevate the destination's brand. And this is kind of on the follow-up of what I talked about earlier. I think people are going to need to have confidence in health and safety, and there are already destinations putting together health and safety pledges. Actually, Singapore Tourism Board has created an audit for their community. So they're going to audit all the hotels to make sure that they are meeting a standard that the Singapore as a nation has created. But I think putting together a health and safety pledge would go a long way to people feeling like they're all in it together, and giving the confidence of those trailblazers, those first travelers, to feel good about making their decision about visiting your resort destination. Marriott has put together a cleaning pledge. Hilton earlier today announced their program with Lysol and the Mayo Clinic. Delta Airlines has created Delta Clean. So these are just a follow-on to that, to make people feel very confident that you guys that the resorts have a plan, and that everybody's engaged in providing a health and safe experience.
Great. Thanks, Warren. Warren alluded to the importance of that community connection, and this particular idea is really about encouraging that commerce and the support of those businesses. Imagine a passport program for your region or your city that really encourages that and allows people to be rewarded by visiting those businesses throughout the community. And then as an extension of that, of the passport idea is really, I love my visits to Colorado and the mountain resorts that I like to ski and hike, but what makes a part of my visit to Summit County most memorable are often my stops at some of my favorite small businesses. I like my Butterhorn Bakery in Frisco to get my baked goods on my way up into the mountains. It's one of your greatest assets, may actually be your channels. And so think about how your channel can transform as an opportunity to remind all of your followers about all of the reasons they love visiting you. It's because of that proximity to all these other local haunts they love. So is this an opportunity to feature not only content from your resort, but also the content from your fellow businesses? And then finally, in ideas for recovery is this idea of reinvention. And then we're going to get to some Q&A. In reinvention, we don't know all the specifics on lockdown orders, But we do know that when we emerge, it's not going to happen quickly. And there's going to be a variety of consumers across the spectrum. Those that can't wait to get there, those that are super cautious, and those that aren't going anywhere until a vaccine is found. So, brands have to have a plan to address all of those segments. And the most important thing here is that not to miss the opportunity to emerge even more relevant in this post-COVID world. We shouldn't just plan for recovery. We want to reinvent ourselves and think about shedding some of the old and becoming the most modern, most helpful, most powerful brand you can be. And so a couple of ideas here just on how we might need to behave and think about the way we behave in the future. This isn't about, it is an important time that we innovate and kind of move certain initiatives forward. So how does it change the way that you will behave forever? How will consumers who have all of these new habits that they develop in the last 8 weeks, how will they continue those on your mountain? How will you modernize to meet their demands and establish trust? And does that mean partnerships, as Warren alluded to? Do tissue stations and map stations transform even further to become and support that human health and safety aspect? And then finally, this may be a few years off, but considering that some places have been investing in the contactless experience, what does that look for your resort in the future? And for those that have made that investment, how do you supercharge that? The innovation with your tech partners and other businesses, what was previously, a tool for convenience has now become somewhat of a necessity because of public health concerns. So there's, small ideas to big ideas. You really can take it really far. But we hope overall that we've sparked some thinking for you today and how you can emerge even stronger in recovery. And we'd love to hear during our last poll and before questions. We'll pause here for a last poll to just see what is holding you back from ideating across the spectrum and coming up with those ideas for recovery. So as we are filling out the last poll, overall, we've kind of come to the end of our content. We will, as Kat alluded to, have some time for some Q&A. We believe that there is opportunity in crisis to strengthen your reputation. And if you can be useful and consider your consumer's journey that is very new and different, and leverage your unfair advantages that we think you have across that brand spectrum, that there is an incredible opportunity here for mountain travel destinations and resorts to really emerge from this crisis even stronger than before if they have that right plan. So it looks like budget and resources. I'm pretty sure we predicted that would be the leader. It is. There's so many ideas and only so much time. The important thing really in this is to not allow that to slow you down, at least in the ideation, to get the data and the consumer insight you need to kind of push on the ideas and think about how to make some of these things possible, and then to place the smart bets. Sometimes constraints, budget and resource constraints, can really make us be even more creative. So really flex those muscles with your staff. And that's all we have for today. I think we'll open it up now for some questions.
Great. Okay. And we have received a handful of questions. So the first question, I think it goes along the lines with the last poll. If for your ideas for recovery, if you are limited with resources and you have to focus on one of the 5 employees, consumers, new consumers, partners, or reinvention, what would you suggest be prioritized in those 5?
Gosh, that is a good one. I'm just kind of going back to my sheet here. You know, I, I really think I'm a very employee inside out thinker. And so turning those employees into inventors and focusing inside your organization, I think often will lead to some really incredible outside ideas for consumers and new consumers. And they're your biggest advocates. They are the lovers of your brand. I think you'd be remiss not to look inside first. And then that often will feed some of these other areas. And I also just think you cannot not think further ahead and in that reinvention space, because the world is changing. It is going to change after this, and we all need to be prepared for that. And those that are the other brands that will survive.
All right, and we've got time for one last question. Do you think that mountain resorts should consider working more closely with travel agencies to help them reposition their customers that are now looking more towards domestic and outdoor vacation opportunities?
You know, I think that's a great question, and I would say absolutely. I wouldn't turn my back on any channel, but more important, I think the travel agency community is going to be looking for ideas on how to provide inspiration and ideas for where to travel for the folks that don't feel comfortable traveling internationally to start with, or that are going to pivot away from some of the types of travel they've done in the past via travel agencies. So think about the cruise market that has been impacted dramatically by COVID-19. I think there's a big opportunity to develop a strategy of working with travel agencies across the country and across the globe, particularly in your feeder markets that you've had success in the past initially. But I would absolutely reach out to all the travel agencies, particularly the ones that focus on leisure tourism. But I think the across the entire travel agency spectrum, the business travel agencies are going to be looking at opportunities for generating revenue, and they'd be more than excited to present mountain resorts as a great option for a destination to go visit, particularly when people are thinking domestic first and foremost. And that doesn't matter whether we're talking the US or any other point on the globe.
Yeah,
domestic travel is, people are going to stay closer to home. Recovery is going to come from regional travel to start, probably via auto. And then as people get more confident and comfortable with the idea of getting back on airplanes, it'll be short haul domestic travel, and then long haul domestic, and then lastly probably international travel. But I think there's a real opportunity to work with the agency community, and I would definitely not hesitate to do that.
Great. Okay. And we are almost up on time. So with that, I would just like to thank Lindsay and Warren for being here today and providing all of this information to you. We will have the recording of the webinar live on MTS's website shortly. So if you'd like to rewatch or pass that to any colleagues, we also have contact information for both Lindsay and Warren here. So if you have any additional questions, you can reach out to them directly. At the end of the webinar, like I mentioned before, there will be a survey where you can opt in to receive more information from Barkley throughout this time period. And Warren and Lindsay, do you want to mention a little bit about this link that we have here on the screen?
Sure. We did share, we shared some different frameworks and kind of models, and we have a plethora of articles and content where you can kind of dive deeper into some of the ideas and models that we shared today at that link. And then you're obviously welcome to reach out to us directly at our emails.
Yeah, and I'll add that I think the MTS team is going to be putting a survey out, and the end of the survey, if you're interested in receiving, some more information from us, particularly as it relates to a travel POV that we're going to be sharing, as well as some other brand and communication information during this COVID-19 crisis, just say yes, and we'll get that to you. And thank you so much for tuning in today.
Great. Thank you, guys. And I just want to remind the audience that we will be back again in 2 weeks with our next webinar called Tourism in the Age of COVID-19, What the Data Tells Us. That is on 5/13, same time as today. You can register on our website at mountaintravel.com/webinars, and we'll have experts from Focusrite, Intopia, STR, and RRC Associates joining us on that webinar. So thanks again, and another reminder to take the survey at the end of the webinar.